1988 was a year that marked the release of the Morris, the very first major worm created by Robert Morris. It infected roughly 6,000 computers over the internet and was a wake-up call that sparked the creation of CERT Coordination Center. Apple sued Microsoft for a copyright infringement over the use of mouse-driven window interface, and the case went back and forth for another 7 years. DOS version 4.0 and later the same year 4.1 were released, and Steve Jobs unveiled his next computer after leaving Apple. And finally, Intel released 386SX CPU, a cut-down version of regular 386, missing a math coprocessor. It was a cost-cutting measure that produced a cripple in the eyes of many products. So, while 1988 was interesting in the world of computing, what we really care about here is what it did to Amiga's gaming. So it's high time that I asked you to hit those like and subscribe buttons below. That's just a couple of clicks for you, but will help me more than you know. Thanks. And Amiga was good. More than good, in fact. The system was well established, developers knew for the most part what they were doing, and capabilities that Amiga offered were still quite impressive for the price that the system was sold for. So, before I bore you to death, let's have a look what most notable titles were released for Commodore's system in 1988. While Barbarian the Ultimate Warrior on Amiga is clearly the best version out of all available, it's still a bit disappointing in my eyes. It looks like a very minor upgrade to the 8-bit versions, which is way below what Amiga was capable of. But don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing the game itself, just pointing out that it could have seriously been expanded on 16-bit systems. Anyway, Barbarian is quite fun game when played against a friend, and most brutal and bloody versus fighter of the 80s. While playing you can actually feel the weight of attacks, and head-chopping finisher is very enjoyable way of highlighting your dominance over defeated opponent. In single player, however, Barbarian gets old quick. It's essentially a series of virtually identical fights that don't innovate in any way over multiplayer, meaning the only difference is you're fighting against considerably more stupid opponent. All that said, Barbarian is still an important title as it was one of the very first few decent versus fighting games on the system. And even though it's not groundbreaking in any way, with no fiery special moves or explosive projectiles like games of the next decade would have in abundance, it's one worth having a go at with a friend. Star Wars is a 1988 port of 1983's arcade original. It's not a big game, it's quite small in fact, consisting of only 3 levels. But given it's a port from arcades where games were made to farm money, it's not a surprise, as they were made to be difficult and flashy and not long. Amiga's version is much easier than original though, so some expansion to the formula or couple of extra levels would be a welcome change. What's most striking about Star Wars though, are its straight from arcade's 3D wireframe graphics. While they could be considered simple, all Empire enemies are easily recognizable, and the game is just a sight to behold in motion. Amiga's version improved in the sound department over the arcade original by not using generated vocals and instead directly ripping off speech from the movies. While arcade controls took getting used to as they felt awkward at first, Amiga's mouse nullifies this issue, making each playthrough a real pleasure. Star Wars is a real fun title and a blast to play that will be appreciated by all shooter fans, not only Star Wars geeks. Vermeer is the only game I'll talk about today that's not in English. It's in German in fact, and I don't speak German. I do, however, know where and how to do everything in this game. It's the only game I've worked everything out in it, while still being a kid without ever learning the language itself. If that doesn't speak to Vermeer's quality, I'm not sure what else would. Anyway, Vermeer is a unique historical trading simulation that takes place in the 1920s, and while it's not overly complicated, it's surprisingly addictive. The main goal of the game is to use 50,000 marks left you by your dying uncle to recover his stolen collection of works of art. To do that, however, you have to amass much more money than the measly 50,000, so you'll partake in stock and currency trading, buying and cultivating products on plantations, and art trade. And believe me when I say that the game is more fun playing just as it is, rather than getting to that ending. It can also be played with up to 3 other players, which quite honestly is the best way of experiencing it. I've made a whole separate review video for Vermeer on this channel, showing both Amiga and C64 versions side by side. So if you're interested, there's quite a lot more details there. Other than Golden Axe, Super Hang-On is the best Sega's arcade game conversion to the Amiga. It may not be as good as Sega's Genesis port, that also had incredible career mode, but other than that, it's a very competent and fun game. It's an arcade racer at heart, so no simulation elements will be found here. It's all about speed, getting to the finish line as fast as possible and beating previous scores. Simple as that. And while it was very basic in its approach, it really didn't have to be any deeper, as it was fast, smooth and enjoyable. Interestingly enough, while it was not as popular in the arcades as Outrun was, it was much better port to the Amiga. Outrun on Migi was just a nightmare and an example on how not to port games. Coming back to subject at hand though, Super Hang-On offers a choice of 4 tracks, each divided into multiple small stages. Tracks are located on different continents and are of different difficulty, but to be quite honest, all are a bit demanding. Thankfully, after reaching speed of 280 km per hour, a turbo is enabled, which increases maximum speed to over 320 km per hour. In my eyes, Super Hang-On is the second or third best motorbike racer on the Amiga. The Great Giana Sisters is a legendary title on the C64, much less so on the Amiga. The similarity of it to Super Mario was not coincidental, as most of you already know. In fact, it was a project proving, while balancing on the edge of copyright infringement, that something akin to Mario was possible on hardware other than the Nintendo's. The first 2 levels actually are very similar to those of Mario, as if they were there only to pay the original some kind of digital respect, but in later ones, Great Giana Sisters grows into its own thing. While the graphics are charming, they are way below Amiga standards and look as if they've been taken straight out of C64 and just splashed with a new coat of paint. And I know it's not the graphics that make the game, but gameplay. I'm just pointing the obvious out. For what it is, Giana Sisters is really fun to play. It seems that reinventing the wheel is not needed and sticking to running from left to right while avoiding dangers and grabbing collectibles while doing so works just fine. It's an important title cause it proved that both Commodore's machines could, and why they didn't is a story for a completely different video. Very often the simplest of ideas end up being the best. Ebonstar is an excellent example of that. The game takes place on a single screen covered with grid, kinda similar to newer games like Geometry Wars. Black Hole moves around the grid at random, swallowing everything around it and occasionally spitting out enemies from another dimension. And the object of the game is quite simple: destruction of said black hole. You can do it by shooting the maintenance beam into the constantly circling the black hole arch object, but if that was all, game would be pretty dull and nothing special. So what makes Ebonstar really fun is that it can be played by up to 4 players at once, all fighting to destroy the black hole and each other. When shooting at each other, players can use their projectiles to repel, to push their ships away, and as you can imagine, most of the fun comes from making all others around you end up in a black hole rather than by completing levels themselves. Ebonstar is one of those titles that are very enjoyable in multiplayer when players can get into that destroy or be destroyed mode. In single player, quite honestly, it's a-okay at best. I'm not sure if that's the case, but looking at it now, I can't help but feel that Geometry Wars games were inspired by Ebonstar. But don't quote me on that. War in Middle-earth, if it's not obvious, is based on J.R.R. Tolkien's epic trilogy of books. Same as in the books, and movies for that matter, your task in the game is to deliver the One True Ring to Mount Doom in Mordor to destroy it. Also, same as in original material, it's easier said than done. The game offers 3 viewpoints: strategic, where you see the whole map of Middle-earth with all your friendly units and armies on it. You can use it to direct your heroes and armies towards specific points on the map. Then there's sorta close-up, side adventure view, in which you can see your heroes traveling the Middle-earth and all the small adventure bits play out. And last but not least, there's a close-up strategic battle view, in which you can watch your characters and whole armies battle it out with forces of Mordor. You can do it passively, or actually take part, issuing one of 4 commands to each of them. Either charge, fight, defend, or run. War in Middle-earth was a very unique and ambitious title for the time of its release. It innovated quite a lot, giving a player a full control of all events in Middle-earth, down to specific units in armies during battles while allowing for completion of main objective in multiple ways. By spreading armies into many attack units, or gathering one huge army and storming gates of Mordor, or even sneaking in with your Fellowship of the Ring heroes quietly while using armies as means of distraction. It's a game that really would have benefited from modern remake. While Speedball was not as well known and polished as its successor was, it was still really fun and based around earlier iteration of uniquely designed futuristic sport, a mixture of handball and hockey that rewarded violent and aggressive play. The game is played by 2 teams on an enclosed pitch with a goal at each end. There are 2 pillars that bounce the ball and change the speed and direction it's going, and a hole in the middle on each side of the court, teleporting the ball between them. They serve as sort of random inducing element during matches. Speedball can be played in 2 modes. Knockout, where you face increasingly tougher teams, and League, which, well, obviously allows you to play out a league season. During matches, coins and power-ups appear randomly on the field. Coins can be used between the rounds to permanently upgrade your team or buy bonuses. Power-ups only work throughout the match they appeared in. And finally, the game is won by the side that scored most goals. Naturally, as with most games that have multiplayer built in, Speedball is also best played against a friend rather than versus CPU. The Armageddon Man was originally released on C64 in 1987 and then ported to Amiga a year later. And if there ever was unusual and innovative title, this is it. The game takes place in back then far-off future of 2032, when the world's 16 major superpowers formed an alliance to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. You, as the titular Armageddon Man, are in control of satellite systems that are the only means of upholding the world peace. So, you have 3 SDI satellites that can be used to shoot off any nuclear missiles, and you decide when and where they go. You can also spy on radio transmissions between the countries to figure out who the aggressor or potential victim may be, so that you'd know how to react. There are also messages and requests that the nations will send you from time to time, and the way you respond to them will influence global stability. Nations differ in technological advancement, military power and resources. So that all, along with the information you gather using earlier mentioned means, are your clues on what to do to prevent nuclear Armageddon. I don't think there's been a similar futuristic pre-apocalyptic political simulation released before, and this may very well be the first one. So, if you're interested, make sure to give it a spin. Since Amiga never got an official port of Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, released in 1988, Pac-Mania was the only version of Yellow Ball Muncher. God, what did I just say? Anyway, it was the only port that was blessed by arcade game creators. For all intents and purposes, it's Pac-Man in isometric view with differently themed mazes in different levels. As opposed to original Pac-Man, however, Pac-Mania does not show entire maze all at once, but just a part that scrolls along with the Pac-Man himself. This may at first seem like a huge difficulty bump, but in reality the game's much easier than the predecessor, so it's not a huge of an issue. And compared to arcade version of Pac-Mania, Amiga's outing still shows more of the board anyway. The game was released on nearly every system available in the late 80s and gained decent fanbase and generally very positive recognition on all of these. So if you don't mind playing something that's not quite up to standard of Miss Pac-Man, but also is not far off, Pac-Mania is a fun game to waste some time on. Times of Lore was released by Origin Systems of Ultima series fame in 1987 for most systems available on the market and 1988 on the Amiga. It's a top-down perspective action role-playing game spanning a massive 13,000 screens in size. In-game player assumes the role of one of 3 characters, Barbarian, Knight or Valkyria, and must unravel the conspiracy surrounding Kingdom of Albareth and find 3 crucial magic items. The game is full of different secrets, be it magical objects and scrolls, mysterious weapons, potions, hidden cities or monster lairs. So, it's hardly a title that will get boring quick. 2 prominent features of Times of Lore were introduction of day-night cycle, that was not common at the time, and immense freedom that could end up with placing game at an unwinnable spot, where a game could still be played but never completed. While this may be considered as bad game design, I actually think it's amazing because it allows for unparalleled freedom of choice of how you want to play the game, and it's something that was mastered years later by Interplay and then perfected by Obsidian. Battle Chess is a game for younger audience or people who don't play the game because of it being rather slow and static strategy. It's basically a regular chess game that introduced semi-3D top-down view that's more attractive than the common back then 2D flat with drawn figures. The most prominent feature of Battle Chess though were the animated movement and battles. Each figure's interaction with the other started a short battle animation. These may have not been anything groundbreaking, but were fun and entertaining for what they were. In the end, Battle Chess is just a good old chess. So if someone did not find those animations charming enough to find interest in the game itself, then after seeing all of them for the nth time, we'll just drop the game anyway. Opinions about the chess engine used in Battle Chess are heavily divided. Some call it simplistic, while others swear that at higher difficulty levels it could pose a challenge. Since I'm not an avid chess player and definitely not proficient enough to be able to gauge its skill, I'd say that for someone who doesn't play chess daily, it's definitely good enough. Looking back at what cinemaware did in those late 80s and early 90s, one can't escape the feeling that they've gone way too soon. They were bankrupt in 1991, but if anyone with bags of money would have realized the impact they'll have on the history of gaming, and invest in them, perhaps we would have seen them flourish and realize their full potential, and become what they really could. After all, if you look at the games they've made, most could be described as interactive movies. Games where story that was told to the player took the front seat before the gameplay. Their games focused on involving story first and let the players take part in it, influencing the outcome second. Today, games like Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, or even Life is Strange are cherished for that exact movie feel. Back then it seems they weren't enough to secure a saving investment. Still, I should really say something about Rocket Ranger, right? It's an action-adventure interactive movie game that takes place during World War II era and where a player takes control of US Army scientists setting out to stop Germany from winning the war. It's clearly inspired by B-class movies and comics tackling the subject, like The Rocketeer, but tells its own story and, as usual with cinemaware titles, does it well. There were some complaints about game's difficulty back in the day, but I believe that the juice was worth the squeeze. Ultima IV Quest of the Avatar is the first of the series to be the modern in its design approach Ultima game, shifting focus from the previous freeze hack-and-slashy approach to the genre to more of the story-driven RPG of the next few outings. It is also the first title of the Age of Enlightenment trilogy. The game was much bigger in scope than many of the previous titles, with maps 16 times larger than in Ultima III. Many puzzle-filled dungeons and tons of additional improvements to dialogue, travel, exploration and world interactivity made it a blast. Despite its simple visuals, Ultima IV is seriously advanced and universally beloved title. The player creation system was very unusual and something I've not seen until Fallout New Vegas in 2010. Basically, you're not choosing stats per se, but are asked a series of ethical dilemmas and based on your answers are assigned a class. It's also a first game in the series where you don't have to save the world, there's no huge crisis and nothing is wrong. On the contrary, former Sosaria, now Britannia, is under the rule of Lord British and is peaceful and quite prosperous. You as a player are assigned a task of learning the true meaning of 8 fundamental virtues and getting the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom to become the shining beacon of good for all others, an avatar of the nation. I gotta say that I've forgotten about this title, but now as I've been preparing this video got into it and I may consider replaying it on my Steam Deck. FA-18 Interceptor is probably one of the most enjoyable combat aircraft simulations on the Amiga or on all systems of the time really. It's set in the San Francisco Bay Area and features many of well-known and notable landmarks like Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and Alcatraz Island. The game balances the simulation and arcade elements perfectly, not making it overly difficult for players just wanting to have some fun, flying missions and destroying targets. And in the same time it offers realistic, nearly lifelike physics engine and mission types that are not over the top, shoot thousands of enemies off the sky, but 6 very enjoyable and down-to-earth missions of visual confirmation, emergency defense operation, interception of stolen aircraft, search and rescue, interception of incoming cruise missile, and carrier submission. In the end, what made FA-18 Interceptor special, apart from its apparent ease of access, was that it was just plain fun to play, and run very smoothly, even on basic A500, with just 512 KB of RAM, having a full 1 MB enabled additional sound effects and music in-game. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I've not played nearly enough original Elite to ever fall in love with it, but it doesn't mean I don't recognize its significance in gaming history. And I've played Frontier, Elite 2 to death, first on the Amiga and then on PC, and Elite Dangerous, but that's completely different subject for a completely different video. Perhaps comparison of all 3, and first encounters too. Perhaps. Coming back to the subject at hand, so Elite, what Ian Bell and David Braben did with this title is short of legendary, keeping in mind it originally released on an underpowered BBC Micro and then ported to everything else under the sun. Elite consisted of 8 galaxies with 256 planets each. Given the power of these early systems, they had to be procedurally generated. Wikipedia calls Elite a space trading video game. For me, however, all titles in the series were more of a life-in-space simulators, where you could trade various commodities, take military missions, fight enemy rogue ships, mine asteroids, get into bounty hunting, and in general, live your space future life. Each of the planets available in the games has a space station orbiting around it. In later games, planetary landings were introduced, and game world expanded beyond the scope of anyone's expectations, but that's something we'll talk in another video. For now, all I can say is that Elite was the first game in the long-running series, and it was a very good game, limited only by the hardware it was originally designed for. Funny enough, it was Zack McKracken and the alien Mindbenders and not Maniac Mansion that was the first point-and-click adventure from LucasArts ported to the Amiga. Funny, cause it was their second adventure game and the whole scam engine it was built with was made with Maniac Mansion in mind and actually stood for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. It will probably not come as a surprise when I say that every single one of LucasArts adventure games was a masterpiece. The aforementioned scam engine used in their games was revolutionary, because it was the first ever point-and-click verb system and it streamlined gameplay control for the whole genre. It was finally possible to drop the old text-based parsers and move to more modern and more comfortable mouse controls. Anyway, the game plot takes place in 1997 and the main protagonist, titular Zack, a writer for a local tabloid, with the help of few friends, need to stop nefarious alien Caponias, who are bent on world domination by collectively lowering every Earthling's intelligence by means of emitting a specific low-frequency sound from their mind-bending machine. The game is full of fun gags and jokes, and in general parodies sci-fi movies of yesteryear. The inspiration that it takes from pop culture and various popular theories about aliens is more than prominent. It's a blast to play and a great story to follow. Believe it or not. Even though released quite early in 1988, IK Plus was second most technical versus fighting game on the Amiga throughout its whole lifespan. First released on C64, IK Plus was a successor to the popular international karate game. And yes, it's karate and not karate apparently. Anyway, the game is technical versus fighter where three combatants bout with each other all at once. Unlike most games in the genre though, there's no HP bars of any kind and the fighters don't go at it till the end, but instead compete for points. First to score 6 points, so 6 solid hits, wins the round. Every couple of rounds there's a bonus stage, that's either deflecting bouncing balls coming from all sides or kicking away bombs. Game logic for the win. The game features quite a wide selection of different moves for the time it was released in. None of them are explosive, fiery, or unearthly special found in other games however. They're all realistic and based on karate martial arts. IK Plus can be played by up to players at once, and quite honestly that's the preferred way of experiencing the game. Graphics and sound design, while being just an extension of what was on C64, both are very nice and definitely above average for 1988. Between all the versions of IK Plus released in 1988, it was Amigas that looked the best and there's just no competition in this department. And while there's only one background you barely even notice, having all that fun kicking and punching. Originally released in 1987 on Atari ST and a year later on the Amiga, Dungeon Master shook the world. It redefined, perfected and standardized the first-person dungeon crawling genre of RPGs. It was the first title to really popularize real-time combat in RPGs, using this perspective, and also chose having party members' skills grow and upgrade by using them rather than basing their effectiveness on abstract experience points and levels. Additionally, Dungeon Master introduced direct object and items manipulation via mouse on main view screen. Minion switches could be used, items picked and dropped all in the very same window, enemies, dungeons and everything else was displayed. Magic was performed using certain combinations of runes, which while novel was never really my cup of tea, and if I had to name one thing I didn't like about the game, that would be it. At the beginning of the game, a player can resurrect up to 4 warriors to form a team and then lead them through the dungeon to recover Grey Lord's fire staff, that is to be used to destroy the Scourge in the form of Lord Chaos. Amiga Sport didn't improve on Atari's original in any meaningful way, but frankly there wasn't much to improve on. Dungeon Master was as good as it could have been in this very first outing. And while other future titles may have improved on the formula, there can only be one first, and that it was. Toasty! Red Storm Rising is a submarine simulation game based on Tom Clancy's novel by the same title, and it takes place in Norwegian Sea, where player takes control of hunter-killer used submarine, performing various missions loosely based on the campaign described in the book. Legendary Sid Meier co-designed the game, meaning you can expect nothing less than a stellar gameplay. And as with most games he dipped his toes in, the game is based around the score awarded at the endgame along with appropriate rank. What's worth mentioning is that the successes and failures of the player actually reflect on the state of the region during gameplay and eventually the outcome of the whole war. So each mission is important, and while some can be lost, it's preferable to aim as high as possible. Red Storm Rising, unlike Silent Service we spoke about in the video about games released in 1986, featured modern by-the nuclear submarines and weaponry. It made the game a bit more interesting, I think, given weaponry used was something we could read about in newspapers or see on the telly. The game was well received and widely appreciated by the fans of the genre, often cited as being the best and most realistic sub-simulation on the Amiga. Even if you're not a fan of simulations, given that cinemaware was involved, I believe that it's at the very least worth checking out once. It was more than clear that by 1988 Amiga was here to stay, and given the very high prices of 386 CPUs and VGA graphic cards, Amiga was slowly becoming the most popular home computer to release games on. And if you had any other micro by 1988 and played games, chances are that you've played versions that were worse looking, sounding and performing. And if you think, wow, 1988 was sure a great year for the Amiga, and she got some real smackers, wait till you see what came out on Commodore 16 Beast in the following years. That, however, is something we'll talk about in the next few videos. Some of the clips for this video were sampled in small parts from other YouTube channels, for various reasons. I may have not been able to run the game, or it would have taken days to get to the point I wanted to show, or I'm just not good enough at particular title anymore, so it was better to show someone more skilled at it. All of those channels are clearly indicated with a blue bar showing their respective names and in the description. These are all great channels and I wholeheartedly recommend subscribing to them as they serve rock solid content. If you liked the video, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. And if you're in a more generous mood, you may want to consider joining my Patreon or a small donation. It would help me deliver more and better content and maybe even get a camera. For me, however, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.